Buonasera a tutti, come vi avevo promesso, stasera abbiamo un musicista di tutto rispetto, uno dei miei idoli, come ben sapete, i Genesis sono uno dei miei gruppi preferiti, quindi stasera avere sul Film Music Channel Steve Hackett è per me un onore, non nascondo di essere abbastanza teso, però come sempre vi auguro una buona visione, i sottotitoli verranno generati il giorno dopo e che dire, partiamo. Steve, hi.
Hi there, Matteo. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Thank you for your time and for your comprehension and everything. So, Steve,
Yes.
I want to ask you
Yeah.
now your future project. Tell us about your new tour, and later we can talk about your history, your important career. So now talk about, if you want, your new
Yes.
project.
Well, it depends what you mean by new project, because I just released a very small album in the everywhere called Live Magic at Trading Boundaries. Live Magic at Trading Boundaries. And it's just a small acoustic album live,
Okay.
recorded over 15 years, cherry picking the best performances. And it just went to #1 in the charts here, in the heavy metal. It's in the rock and metal charts. Ironically, there is no heavy metal on it. It's all gentle acoustic stuff. And it went to #1 in the downloads in the States. So I'm bringing you right up to the present day. The previous album I did was called The Circus and the Night Whale.
Yes.
That's my most recent studio album. So live, I'm playing several selections from that, and also revisiting an album from 50 years ago, which is Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I'm playing 9 songs from that. So it's like a mini tour of the Lamb. I will be playing that in Italy later in the year. I'm playing 1 or 2 things in the United States. The next thing I do is Cruise to the Edge.
Yes.
A cruise, that takes off from in Florida and goes around the Caribbean. I've played that many times before. I always enjoy doing that. There's lots of acts on it that I'm sure you know. But then for the rest of this year, I'm celebrating Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and Circus and the Night Whale. A little bit of stuff from Voyage of the Acolyte, my first solo album.
Yes.
Because it is its 50th anniversary as well as The Lamb. So I have 2 albums, both 50 years ago, being celebrated in different ways. And of course, there's a new version of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway coming out, a special edition with various stuff on it that's supposed to be coming out anytime soon. So that's, those are the latest projects. And I've just moved into a new house. So I'm going to be, I'm making a new studio downstairs. So I will be recording very soon. In a couple of weeks, I start recording new material. So there's always new stuff. Celebrate the new, honor the old, try and make everything possible, if you see what I mean. There we go. Just got some stuff going on downstairs, lighting being fixed. There we go.
And Steve, I know that at the end of March, it will be released the box set of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Yes.
And I think that I will buy, because it is very important album for me. I want to ask you, in this box set, your presence to this remastering is a good thing, and you in this project, in this process, you supervising or not this thing?
No, I think with everything with Genesis, I just rubber stamp it and I say anything from the past is good. I hope to hear some of it before it's released. I know Peter Gabriel has done a new mix of the lives.
Okay.
That's all I know. So I don't know any more than you do about this. I'm going to be seeing the guys soon because it's Tony Smith's birthday and we're all supposed to be having a get together to celebrate that. He's later this month because, you know, he's Aquarian as well as me. I'm Aquarian.
Like me.
Peter Gabriel is Aquarian. Phil Collins is Aquarian. Tony Smith, the manager, is Aquarian. You know, it's we have.
And me too, Steve. Because Friday it will be my birthday.
Really? Okay. Well, happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Steve. So the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, it is an important album for you.
Yes. Yes.
Can you recall, Steve, some memories about it? Maybe the legendary demos on Edric Grange.
Right.
Because I know that in the box set it will be some of these demos. Can you recall it?
Well, you know, it's like we were living in this house which Led Zeppelin were in the place before we were. Jimmy Page said he thought the place was haunted. And also Robert Plant also said he thought the place was haunted. All I know is that every night the noise was so loud in the bedroom I had at the top of the house, which I think was the same one that Jimmy Page did. You couldn't get to sleep because the noises were so loud. It was extraordinary. And so I remember being in an altered state of consciousness for doing the whole of the album. I was always tired. I was always at least tired. And I was trying to stay focused. It was a difficult time for me because I was going through a divorce, a separation, all of that. So difficult social conditions. Peter Gabriel was in the band, but he was also leaving the band at the same time. So we were rehearsing in one room and Peter was writing in another. And we would come together and try and combine the things that we had written separately. The group was separate from Peter. And at that time, I think that it was perhaps time for a change. You know, it was Peter's swan song with the band. It's a very good album. There's lots of things on it. It's in many ways, it's a very unromantic album. Peter wanted it to sound very modern. But with Genesis, I think some of the best things on it are the more pre-Raphaelite inspired things, such as the Lamia,
Carpet Crawlers,
Silent Sorrow and Empty Boats. Many of the atmospheric pieces, Fly on a Windshield, which was originally called
The Waiting Room,
Pharaohs. It was originally called Pharaohs, but we were thinking of the style of the music from Ben-Hur, ramming speed, the oarsman in the boat. Funnily enough, I was watching this film today with Charlton Heston, the commentary. So I always come back to that film that was orchestrated by Miklas Rosa, Hungarian composer. So there was that, and there was also the influence. Tony and I shared a love of classical music, and he was influenced by Respighi. He wanted me to hear the Pines of Rome. You know, the Pines of Rome.
Yes.
I knew the fountains of Rome. I was familiar with that. I think the Pines of Rome, which often people talk about this in the same breath as pictures at an exhibition, where at the end of pictures at an exhibition, you get the Great Gate at Kiev, where there is supposed to be a march past of ancient heroes. The same thing happens with Respighi, with the Pines of Rome, where the legions come to life. It starts by a sepulchre, a tomb, and something happens. It starts very quietly. It's a crescendo, and you hear the marching feet, an orchestra doing it. And in a way, some of what we were doing at that time was influenced by that. I'm thinking of Fly on a Windshield particularly, because you have this feeling of conflict and armies on the march and the whole freeing of the slaves. So in a way, it was Genesis at the most mythological, not Genesis at their most modern, which would be something like New York City. So we have this sort of feeling on the album of the ancient and modern, a band pulling in several different directions at the same time. Virtuosic keyboard parts, very dense vocal parts,
complex drum parts,
yes,
complex.
Indeed, claustrophobic kind of atmosphere.
Yes,
as is New York, modern day. Really, New York hasn't changed for 50 years. It's the same thing. The smoke still comes out of the sidewalk. They still come through the same funnels, the same tunnels and funnels. The backdrop to Lambas down on Broadway, it continues. The pageant that is New York remains the same. The cabs look the same. The roads, because it's very hot and very cold.
subway.
Yes, the roads go up and down because they buckle under the heat and the cold. You always have this. So in a way, it's bustling. It's a city always in turmoil. It never really sleeps. It's the anthill. It's all of that. But I always like Pete's idea of the Wall of Death, and a depiction of the Wall of Death, I think, really comes with Fly on a Windshield, although it's not my favorite title, because I think it's more important than the idea of a squashed insect. But hey, the music speaks for itself.
And two important things about this classic album.
Yeah.
The first one, it was a pity that Lamb doesn't come a movie, because in my point of view, if the Lamb was a movie, it was a good one. I know that Peter Gabriel was in contact with Jodorowsky, but can you recall, Steve, if someone of the band, you in particular, remember some things about the classic idea to do a movie?
Well, I believe it's possible that a movie will be made even now. All I can say is it's a possibility. Beyond that, I don't know, because many things have been spoken about with the Lamb. There is always the possibility it will be a musical. There is a possibility that the band would reform to play it live. The possibility of many things. But all of these pipe dreams, none of them ever became reality. So we don't know if it will ever be a film, whether it will ever be a musical, or just a re-released album in heightened form with extra detail. I don't know. It depends. For some people, it's changed their lives. For some people, it's their Sgt. Pepper. For the people who did it, we think of it perhaps as another Genesis album, an important step. But the quality of writing of early Genesis was very, very high, I think. And it meant that you had a number of people who were either very good writers or became very good writers subsequently after that. So I choose to celebrate it myself by going out and playing it live. Everyone else is talking about it. I'm the one who's doing it. That's it. It's not mythology. It's real. It's me going out and doing it. So I love it very much.
And Steve, and the second important thing, I was surprised because I am 40 now, but when I was 12 years and I listened for the first time, I see in the credits, I saw in the credits the presence of Brian Eno. Can you recall it? Why Brian Eno worked maybe for the synthesizer, because it was inosification.
Yes.
Can you remember his work and when he came to the studio to give some kind of defects?
Yes. It was very interesting working with Brian Eno, because he came to the band without any baggage or any experience of the band. So he was free from band politics. He didn't know that the band was losing its lead singer. He didn't know what all the problems were. So he came in fresh, a breath of fresh air, and we all listened to him. And he had some effects that he put on existing stuff that we had. And I think he worked very well to make the album sound more interesting. You get a lot of sounds on it that it's hard to tell what they are. They sound a little bit like guitars or a little bit like voices, but they've been treated. And so his involvement with the album was minimal, but I think the effect was maximal.
Yes. And Steve, after the leaving of Genesis, now we can talk about your solo career.
Yes.
But at the end of 1975, your first album, The Voyage of Acolyte.
Yes.
My favorite song, it is Shadow of Hierophant.
Yes.
When you write it at the end of the song, you meaning to do like a crescendo, or it was a little symphony? Because I know that it is a very articulate and complex song. When you write it down, you was in trance or something, because it is a journey, this song.
Well, I play it live when Amanda Lehman is with the band, and that's not all times. When she's with us, we do the whole thing. And the whole thing, when it's done, is a little bit like a symphony. You're quite right. And the full-length version is something like 15 minutes long. Sometimes I just play the end, because then you get the crescendo section, which works in a way a little bit like a rock band meets Beethoven meets Ravel, because you get the crescendo. Again, Respighi, Ravel, crescendo, all of this stuff. It's an intriguing piece of music. I wrote the first bit on the mellotron itself, and I wanted to write something where it could have a kind of epic quality to it.
Yes.
And at the time, I was in love with the sound of the mellotron.
Yes.
And I realized what a powerful thing it was. So we made it sound very good on the record, I think. I believe I played it myself, and we tracked it in stereo. So I played it once, it was on one side of the stereo, played it again, it was on the other side of the stereo. And because it's a mechanical thing, it plays slightly differently, slightly different speeds. And so the tuning will be slightly different on one side than the other. It's a mechanical thing. But I remember John Aycock saying to me, who was engineering the album, he said, mellotrons can sound okay when they're tarted up. When he said tart, he means like putting makeup on it. Plus de maquillage, it's like, so we put reverb on it to try and make it breathe, make it sound more like a
huge
symphony orchestra. Yeah, a big sound, and I used slide guitar and faded in the notes so that the guitar becomes another instrument of the orchestra. And then there's a tapping section later on where it's just the guitar on its own. Don't forget, there's Mike Oldfield's sister singing on the original.
Sally, yes.
Sally Oldfield, yes. And it was very lovely working with her. She was very good, very, very sweet, very lovely. And of course, Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins were on the track. Mike played bass pedals and also 12-string guitar, distorted, fading in the notes at the end, along with me. So we had several guitars all going in octaves at the end, but we're all trying to sound like orchestral instruments rather than like anything classical. So in some ways, it's got a sort of a slightly kind of rock version of the Moonlight Sonata about it.
Very classical.
Very
Very
classical,
classical.
little bit like that. And I think also an aspect of She's So Heavy with the Beatles, you have this as well. So as I say, and crescendo, I started out playing the simple glockenspiel at the beginning, little instrument, you know, with a mallet. And
Yes.
So you get the theme played very, very quietly at first, then it's joined by mellotron strings and bass pedals. Before the days of Taurus pedals, which a lot of prog bands use, we were using Vox pedals through a fuzz box. So through a fuzz box with an MXR phaser, for those who are interested in that. So it's a bass pedal sound that I think you won't get. Ironically, of course, later on when Bob Moog developed the Taurus bass pedals, they ended up sounding quite similar. So, and when we do it live, we don't use Taurus or the Vox. We use a modern facsimile of that. And with my band, Jonas plays bass as well. So he plays high bass and that, and we take it through octaves, and there's drums going flat out. It's probably the most dramatic part of the entire set. It just gets louder and louder, shakes the foundations of wherever we are. And it sounds a little bit like ancient Rome or ancient Greece being rebuilt from not necessarily the ashes, but from one tiny little acorn growing into a big tree, perhaps. And it's very, very beautiful. The audiences, I think they go through a spiritual sort of thing when they see it. When I first played it to my wife, Jo, she said it reminded her of the Greek play, the Oresteia, where it is both ceremonial, but it also talks about the end of vengeful activity and human sacrifice. So it has a sort of healing, a sort of humanitarian thing. So you get an idea of the march past of, once again, you know, the past coming at you and becoming present, and the feeling of change, time and perspectives. It has a magical, elusive quality. It's proved itself over and over again. Playing it live is something monumental.
Steve, Shadow of Hierophant, in my life, it is an important song, because I know that, and I know maybe it will be a good thing for you in my difficult moments, because in life there's so much. Shadow of Hierophant was an important song, and gave me the strength to find the right solution. As your wife, a different image in the history. For me, this song is an image of a man who rebuilt his life and his difficulties. It is the power of the music, Steve. The power of your music, because your music go to the epic song and to the love song. When I was married, my wife, I dedicate to her Sentimental Institution. When I proposal to marry me, I put it down on my stereo, this song, and I said to her, I want to marry you.
Right. Well, Sentimental Institution was written as a kind of pastiche or a spoof of the kind of music that came out of the big band era, the era of Bing Crosby and the big bands and Artie Shaw,
Glenn Miller.
Was that Glenn Miller, all of that written in the style and sung in the style of a crooner, very mono, done with the Optigan.
Optigan, Mattel.
Yes, that's a very interesting, very lo-fi, but interesting instrument that conveys instantly things from the past. I know that there are bands who've used it. I've sometimes used it and then superimposed more modern instruments. I've sometimes used it backwards. It's a very interesting beast. But of course, it sounds immediately like a big band. It's like a cross between a record player, like an interactive record player, really, where you change the chords, but you're working with preset riffs and melodies. And it's very easy to play. Even a child could play it because it was designed like a children's toy.
Yes, it was a children's toy.
For the home organ market, so that you could play at home. You could play a melody on the keyboard, and then with the presets, you could do something else. So you could do something that was truly astounding. It's a little bit like the Mellotron, the Mark II, which has these pre-recorded riffs as well, but it takes that idea a stage further, and playing through Perspex discs, of course, you have added distortion and wow and flutter. So whatever you're doing, it sounds like you're listening to an old 78 from way back in Bing Crosby's day.
And Steve, in those days, what were your listening in music? What kind of music after leaving Genesis and when you was in Genesis, your taste in music was changed? Can you tell us about the bands who listening in those days?
Well, I think I've spent a lot of time listening to classical music and film music. I mentioned, I think earlier, Miklos Rozsa, who wrote music for many Hollywood epics. And really, I think of him as a classical composer working in film. The most famous soundtrack for me, which I believe he won an Oscar for, was the Ben-Hur soundtrack from the late 1950s. And it's full of very beautiful themes. And the film is 3.5 hours long, the most expensive film ever made. And the music is required to run throughout. There are so many moments of vocal silences where the music runs. And you imagine it's like writing several symphonies all back to back with that. So the workload must have been huge. Apart from that, what was I listening to when I left Genesis? Oh my God. I don't know. I was listening to everything. I was listening to the Beatles. I was listening to Queen. I was listening to all of the contemporary bands. I was listening to all of the progressive bands that we were a part of, obviously with Yes and ELP and Procol Harum. Rush, definitely. Very interesting. And the Doobie Brothers, all sorts of stuff. American stuff, Joni Mitchell, Buffy St. Marie, J.S. Bach, Segovia, Jimi Hendrix, and then, present day, listening to
King Crimson.
Yes, King Crimson. I'm thinking Joe Bonamassa these days. I like him very much. Jeff Beck. So many great guitarists have passed. Peter Green, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, of course.
Santana, John McLaughlin.
Yes, all of those, and George Martin working with John McLaughlin, very interesting as well. Yeah, hugely interesting. All these guitarists, most of them were British and all sounding marvelous. So Eddie Van Halen, Brian May, some of them I worked with.
Very different people.
Yes, the tapping technique, of course, I was doing back in 1971 on Nursery Crime. So you hear it.
Musical Box, yes.
You hear it on Musical Box. You hear it on the beginning of
The Return of the Giant of
Hogweed, and Dancing with the Moonlit Night, all this stuff. So I was doing this right back then, and I realized it's a very useful technique if you want to play very, very fast and use the fretboard like a keyboard. Of course, you can make jumps that are not really available to the guitarist when you're playing in the conventional way, but when you've got a very responsive guitar sound, you can nip around everywhere and you can play so fast. You'd have to slow the recording down to be able to tell all of the detail that's being produced. It's the way of playing faster, I think, than any other technique.
I think about you was and you are a pioneer in this technique, in this technique, because you are different from the classical prog guitarist like Fripp, like others, or like Steve Howe. Steve Howe in the 80s with the guitar. But I want to say, I want to ask you this.
Yes.
In the 80s, you was very brave to do an album with the Lin Drum, and it is my favorite album of the 80s, Cured.
Yes.
Why, Steve, in those days you changed this kind of new direction? Not the band, but
okay. It was quite simple, really. I was running out of money, to be honest.
Okay.
I had a band for 2 years, and then suddenly I ran out of money. I couldn't afford to pay everybody every week as I was doing. And Nick Magnus and I were talking about the possibility of doing an album, and he would do the drums on the Lin Drum. I would play the bass. I would do the singing myself. I hadn't done that before. So it was a new experience. I was experimenting as a singer. I was experimenting as a bass player. And so the whole thing was a big experiment, really. So, you know, that was really, it was early days of sampling, because really all of those drums had been sampled on the Lin Drum, but we weren't talking about samplers per se at that point. It was just before that technology kicked in. So it made it possible for two people to sound a little bit like a band. I mean, it sounds very dated now because you can tell that it's a Lin Drum. Musicians would pick a hole in it and say, well, it's not a virtuoso drum performance, etc., etc. But it was a one-off. You know, I didn't spend my life in that direction. I did many different things, including some acoustic albums, recording Bach, or sometimes working with a nylon guitar and orchestra, like A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Bay of Kings, Momentum.
Bay of Kings, Momentum, yes. Metamorpheus is another one which has just been re-released.
And Satie, and the
Satie,
work with your brother.
yeah, my work with John Hackett and myself, it was really John's album, and my name was on it, at the Satie album, Sketches of Satie. Very beautiful album, very lovely music by the wonderful Eric Satie, wonderful music for flute. It gets used still on TV and film. People use that because it's very pure guitar and flute, beautiful impressionist, minimalist music, French, fin de siècle, as it were, early 1900s, 1920, this sort of era of stuff. Debussy, as a contemporary of Eric Satie, orchestrating the Eric Satie pieces. Yes, very lovely to work with John doing that.
And Steve, your favorite album of the 80s. What is your favorite album of your career of the 80s? Your personal favorite?
Oh, goodness me. That's a hard one, of something that I've done myself, you mean?
Yes.
Well, the 1980s were a more difficult period for many musicians because record companies which had previously signed up artists who made albums now wanted those artists to have hit singles. So I did an album called Highly Strung. And
yes.
I got a hit single in England, but the process of getting that was very difficult and convoluted, and there were many attempts at working the song that became a hit, which was Cell 151. I went on to work with Steve Howe with a band called GTR. We had that together, and I very much liked When the Heart Rules the Mind, the song that we did together. I thought was
it was a hit.
The hit single, but it was hit single in America. Cell 151 was a hit single in England. But all these things get re-released and they go through a reappraisal, I think. In the 80s, it became harder to produce things. I did an album with Bonnie Tyler, Chris Thompson, Brian May, the guys from Marillion, many guest stars, and it didn't get released for 11 years because of complications that were going on in my private life, and I think it got re-released again, called Feedback 86, but some stuff on it is very good indeed. So sometimes I like the things. You might think I would choose the successes, but sometimes I like the things that are the apparent failures. It's just that they didn't always get the level of attention that perhaps they should have had. GTR had a lot of publicity, certainly in America with MTV and all of that. Feedback 86 had no publicity.
No,
and eventually was an escape rather than the release, but there we are.
Like Steve, Till We Have Faces. It
Yes.
was a mysterious album because sometimes it was an album that not so many people knows. Till We Have Faces, and for me, it is very good with Brazilian atmospheres inside.
Yes, yeah. Well, that was. I wanted to work in Brazil. It was a case of total immersion in percussion. I wanted to be able to understand drums and drumming, how that could lead an album. So at that time, I was also talking to Peter Gabriel, and I sent him a copy of the album, and he said to me, "Can I have your phone book? I'm going to be traveling there. I'd like to, maybe meet some of these people." So I said, yeah, of course, And so there's a correlation, I think, between what Peter was doing with masked drums, also the music that Paul Simon did, Rhythm of the Saints, which had similarly
Graceland, okay.
different thing, and much of what Peter Gabriel did, which influenced music that was used on, the Bourne identity, the Bourne trilogy, all of that stuff was influenced by this percussion-driven
like a loop
use. Yes, like that. Well, and the use of orchestra, but in a very percussive sort of way, like the use of cello. Da 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 da. The idea of semiquavers, relentlessly Marcato. This use of orchestra, where orchestra can be very driving and can be very percussive and emotive. So rock music gets to influence film music. You could say that rock music was influenced by folk music, which then influenced film music. You could say it's all folk music, of course. Many people say that it's all folk music. Dylan says that. The people he was working with, Thelonious Monk, says it's all folk music. It's whatever's shared is folk music, and music has to be shared, of course.
And Steve, thank you for your time. Thank you for everything. For the 2 days, for the 2 dates, we can go on your website.
Yes, it will have all the dates of things coming up. So it'll be a busy year touring very soon. And I look forward to being back in Italy at the end of the summer. September, where it might be a little cooler. It might make it a little easier for the crew, who fry out there out on the terraces. But I'm looking forward to coming back to wonderful Italy. It's always in my heart.
Steve, I have to say this. In Italy, we have an important Genesis tribute band. Get them out. They are very good.
Yes.
They are very good.
Very good. Very good.
Yes, it is like not in this way like the musical box, but in Italy, if you want to go, and they are my friends, get them out. They are very, very careful reproducing the same sound. In your case, the guitarist, his name is Marco. It is very, very, very carefully important. So I will came if I can to September at the Teatro of the Arcimboldi in Milano.
Fantastic. I look forward to it and hope to see you there. So anyway, all the best. Thank you. And
thank you, Steve, for everything. Thank you for your music. For me, it is an important conversation with one of my important hero, because Genesis, it is an important band. I am a huge fan, and I am a drummer.
And you play drums?
Nice. Yes.
Good.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for everything.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Really. Thank you.
Ciao, Steve. Ciao a tutti, grazie.
All the best.
Bye.
Okay. Ciao, ciao.